So my name's Kath Sharp, and I'm a volunteer in the Heritage Centre in Whaley, Thorns, Langwith.
I'm Patricia Ann Taylor from Bolsover.
You're a volunteer here, aren't you?
I volunteer, I also do family history.
When is Langwith first mentioned within the historical record?
Okay, it's not in the Domesday Book. People did think it was, but by the 1080s, there were mention of Upper Langwith and Nether Langwith as small settlements.
Does Langwith come into being when industry comes into being?
Langwith does come into being at that point, yes. There was very little here other than woods until the colliery was being talked about and then sunk.
What was here before Langwith is first mentioned within the historical record?
Langwith was very small settlements at Upper Langwith and Nether Langwith, mainly for farming purposes in the day, and didn't really get written about as in after the Domesday Book until the 1080s, when they were both mentioned.
So would you say it's a typical area of Derbyshire in that respect, that before the Industrial Revolution you're a bit off the beaten track? What were the primary industries established in Langwith during its formative period?
The need to support the farms would have been in caring for the horses, i.e. shoeing, so forges, and they used lime. There were lime kilns. They used the lime on the land. They used it for the houses, later brickworks, sheep dips, all kinds of things that appeared because of the need of the local farms and small industries.
So the next question is, describe in brief how local and national industries have both evolved and declined within Langwith. So describe in brief how local and national industries have both evolved and declined within Langwith. So tell us about, so Langwith was like that for many years until the first industry arrived. What was that industry and what was the effect?
Yes, it was mainly farming, and still are some here today. But then along came cotton mill, which employed young children. Then we had the maltings for many years, which developed into flour milling, storage, all kinds of things as time moved on and things weren't needed anymore. We had the colliery came along, and
1700.
a lot of the farmland became used for other things. The colliery took some of the farmland for an example.
So Langwith was agricultural for many, many years, we know that. But that all changed with the start of heavy industry coming into the area. Can you tell us a bit about the first ones that came in and talk us about the effects it had on the village itself?
The cotton mill was one of the first big industries because although Lancashire was a big cotton area, people found other places where they felt it was a good idea to put another mill in, and so that's what happened in Langwith. And a small community built around it because people needed somewhere to live. After that, we had the Maltins that also had a little community around it where people needed to live. There were all kinds of things attached to those areas. I don't know if there were any shops at that time. We've never really found out how people survived for produce. Probably had to grow it themselves.
Allotments. Mm.
So, you know, until the colliery came along, yes, we did have rich people. We had rich people who were attached to possibly the Welbeck estates, as they were created over the years. People worked there, and then the rich and the famous came along and bought the land from the farmers to sink the colliery.
So what was happening in England at the time? Why was the collieries suddenly becoming a thing?
I suppose people started surveying and finding out what was underground. So this area is rife for pits, collieries, which we had for many, many years until they were all subsequently and in order closed down.
So in wider England, the Industrial Revolution is well underway.
Yes.
And people are not just needing power to drive these mills and these engines, but they're starting to dig underground and look for all these new products that they're going to need to manufacture new products.
Yes.
And Langwith's a pretty good area for that.
It was. Who discovered it all is unknown to us. But certainly, yes, that's when the area started to grow, when these different industries came along.
What did the industries bring to Langwith apart from the colliery? What did they need?
Well, they needed housing. People needed somewhere to live. The people at the cotton mill were struggling because there was, once the production ceased, there was no electricity or water supplied to those cottages. And so new houses were built to move those people into. And not so much with the Maltins, because they were quite modern homes as they'd come later on. But yes, the people needed to shop, they needed to live. Houses were built as a steady flow, and more people moved in, and little shops were opened, what we called front room shops. Many of those around Langwith and Whaley Thorns.
So did the colliery build some of this infrastructure? They didn't just sort of build the houses and leave the people to it. Did they build the school? Did they build some of the shops themselves?
I think the colliery had a lot to do with the building of these houses. As I say, as it grew, the streets got more and more. As I said earlier, it was a lot of woodland. So the Woodlands was a housing estate built on that premise, you know. So yes, shops. People just, I don't know. I suppose there were no laws about it back in the day. They just decided they were going to open a little shop in their spare room, front room, and so it began.
And who built the school?
I think the colliery did build the school, and they also generated the electricity that was needed in the early days, because there was nothing like that in this village. So it would have been coal fires, but for lighting, as people got into the electric light bulbs, the colliery provided that energy.
What's the next industry that comes in to Langwith?
The colliery had a byproducts plant attached to it behind it, and they made fertilisers, I think, from those byproducts, and I don't know exactly what they were. But because of that, when World War I came around, we got a munitions factory, because the munitions works needed the products that had been made there. The government chose sites that had the perfect setting and the chemicals that were needed to do the munitions work, and Langwith's provided the perchlorate that went into the sea mines that protected our coastlines.
I understand the munitions factory was a secret though.
It was very secret. As I say, the government and the king were the very few people who knew about these places, because they didn't want other countries to know what was being produced.
So what was the impact on the village? Did they have to bring in people from outside the area who knew about munitions, or was it all, could local people be trained up into that factory?
There were a lot of local people from Langwith and Shirebrook, possibly further afield, mostly young women, because the men were at war. There were a few men, of course, who were managers, and it survived just through the war years. It was built specifically, and then it was pulled down because it wasn't needed anymore.
So was that the high point of industry in Langwith and the amount of people that worked here?
I would say so, because, you know, the colliery was still in operation, and the extra people that were needed, as I say, lived fairly local. So the managers there also needed accommodation, and that brought more housing. So there was a specific street that was built to house the workforce and the managers.
Would you say then for Langwith, the heavy industry that came in, like across all of England and Britain, it had a modernising effect on that society?
It did have a modernising effect. Although people didn't have bathrooms back in the day, it was the tin bath era. Eventually, yes, houses were modernised, and so people had better, cleaner lives. You know, there was a lot of soot around back then. Yes, there were allotments where people did grow their own, and it was a time when people could take a holiday. There was, well, in certain areas they called it the Wakes Weeks, where villages just emptied because people had gone to somewhere like Skegness in this area, you know. So yes, people had that little bit extra, and there were fairgrounds that came. So, and there was a cinema eventually that people could have entertainment within their lives that had never been around before.
You mentioned going on holidays for the first time, so my assumption is then you've had to have had infrastructure like train lines built in to serve the colliery, serve the munitions, and then those train lines became the way that people here could get to the coast.
Yes, because there wasn't many cars around. This village wasn't built for cars. So yes, there was an east to west railway line. The colliery one wasn't so much for general public, I don't think, until much later, when the line was opened up that connected Worksop to Nottingham. So you'd got the east-west for quite a while, and then together with that, the north-south.
Okay, so we've lost the cotton mill by this point, by the First World War. We've lost the maltings. We have the colliery, but after the First World War, the munitions factory, that gets closed down. We no longer need that. So what happens to Langwith then with the colliery, and you know, does the village keep growing or does it stay in stasis? What happens?
So after the munitions factory closed and the colliery kept working, and so people, yes, were just living their lives, working in the collieries, taking those few holidays that they could afford, until the colliery closed, really.
And when was that?
It closed in 1978, and that was a big upheaval in this village. People were transferred to other collieries if they could get the work there, and if they wanted the work still in the collieries. And Langwith was one of the very first to close. So it was a trying time for a lot of people, because the government or anybody else realised that they needed to retrain people for other things. So there was a little bit of a slump, I think, locally.
Did people start to leave the village?
They did leave the
To a
village.
degree.
Yeah, certainly if they were going to work in a different colliery. Some people could travel, but it depended how far away they'd got to go.
And what effect did that have on the village? So things like shops and other buildings, there's less people around now. So what's the effect on the village that way?
I don't know so much about less people, maybe to a degree, but one by one shops closed, mostly I should imagine because people died and family didn't want to carry them on.
And would it be a case that people didn't have the money that they used to have?
It would depend on whether they found other work. If they were still working in collieries, yes, they would still have the money to spend.
The colliery in Langwith is one of the first ones to close, but people can still work if they want to in the local area. But is this the start of not the end for Langwith, but a change where you're now living here, but you're having to travel out of Langwith now for work?
Yes, to a degree, I think so. We did have nursing homes. There was one particularly one that had been there for a while. It had been a hospital at one time. So people did get into the caring side of work placements. The other two that came along much later also provided work for local people.
Have you personally seen a change in the significance of industry within Langwith, and how have local services been affected, especially since the end of the colliery?
I came to the village in 1983, and at that point the co-op, which had departments for anything and everything that you would need, had closed. The dairy had gone, and they were beginning to pull it down. Above that co-op was a cinema, which people had enjoyed for quite a few years. So all of that side had gone. There were still little shops. There were the cobblers, there were doctors' surgeries and all that kind of thing. And yes, the village deteriorated because there was no... Discipline's probably the wrong word to use, but because the colliery had looked after people, they were set adrift, really, along the way. And it had to rebuild itself. Some of the houses were pulled down because of subsidence, so it looked a little bit, really lost and uncared for a short while.
Yeah, it was like a ghost town, really, didn't it, to a certain degree, because of all the shops shutting and people moving out, and things were changing all the time.
I think, people-wise, they'd got cars by then. The miners' strike did come along and spoiled a lot of things, and there was a lot of help around for the miners in this area as well. So we can't knock that. But yes, people had got cars, and the younger people were looking for work elsewhere because there wasn't that much totally local for them. So yes, people did start getting a little bit more adventurous, I think. Mid to late 80s, there were probably 2 or 3 shops still within the housing rows and estates. And then gradually, as I said before, when people passed away, nobody took them on, so they disappeared. And I think it kind of got to the point where there was always just one too many of something. And by the 2000s, we'd got a main shop and a post office at the top end, and a main shop and a post office at the bottom end of the village, because it's a spread out places, Langwith. And the extra little bits and pieces. There were 2 or 3 shops at the bottom of the village, but 1, 2 at the most at the top end here, and then things change, modernise, different kinds of shops come along that we didn't really know about before, like we'd had hairdressers. And I think that was probably one of the main ones that we'd got. Chemists, we had a chemist. There was a cobbler's at one point, which over the years just disappeared.
What do you think about Langwith now? The difference between don't tell me about shops are closing. Just the feel of it.
I think it's just somewhere for somebody to live that's nice, because they like the woodlands, they like the trees and everything that they've put out there. Whatever they've built has been satisfactory. There's odd things that's not acceptable to some people, but mostly people do like it here, don't they?
Yes.
So do you think it's become a place where, I don't want to say it's off the beaten track, but if you want a bit of a quieter life and closer to nature,
Yes.
it's become that type of place?
Yes.
Yes, it is, because, we're smack in the middle of countryside. We're on the edge of the Dukeries. We've got parks and estates and Rufford, we've got Clumber, we've got all kinds of things. We're not that far from Chatsworth and and all those other places that people like to go to. We've got a train line that goes north to south these days. People have got cars. You know, we've even started getting charging points for electric cars in the new builds. You know, things have moved on dramatically, really, over the last few years. And the main employer around here now are the nursing homes. So, you know, people don't need to travel so far if they've got jobs there. There were a couple of units built. One of them was made shop equipment, but that went quite a while back. There's another one up there, but I'm not sure what they do. And then there's, I think there's some storage. Somebody put some storage containers up at the top there, and so I assume people use those.
What's changed recently then with, you know, when we've had COVID? What's Langwith become to some people?
A sanctuary. It's lovely to live around here. It's very quiet. You can work from home. You can take your dog for a walk. You can do all those things that probably support good mental health. Yeah, there's enough shops to keep you going. There's enough public houses. You can get a meal in quite a few different places. There's sport. We've got boxing. We've got cricket. We've got football. You know, Langwith never died, and I think that was down to the local people.
It just took a break.
There are so many families still here with 3 and possibly 4 generations still in this village. They don't want to go anywhere else. And yes, we welcome new people, and we've got quite a few of them. But yeah, Langwith's sound. It's not going anywhere.